What's up, everyone? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and yes, I know I've been pretty lax on the videos the last couple of weeks. I've had some really bad personal issues that I've had to deal with, and they're not fully sorted out, so don't get your hopes up with the back on track of regular videos for the moment, at least, anyway. But the big thing I want to make a video about is it's a couple of days overdue at this point, and the main thing is I've actually got to mess around with it, and I've been kind of ignoring the stuff online mostly about it. But Final Fantasy 15 has finally, no pun intended, or play on words, rather it's not a pun, but either way, Final Fantasy 15 has finally got its 60 FPS PS4 Pro patch. We all knew this was coming. It was due on the 21st of February. It actually launched a day early on the 20th of February, which was even nicer. I didn't get to try it out until 1 or 2 days later, and that was really only the tutorial I got to mess around with. I wanted to get the grips with the controls and with some of the systems, the basic systems, and the camera were, and the combat as well, which were all the ones I just wanted to quickly touch on. Then I waited 1 or 2 more days, and as you're seeing right here, I finally got to start and play the main game. Now, one thing you've probably already noticed at this point, because we're over a minute in, is that even with the PS4 Pro, the 60 FPS mode does not lock at 60 FPS. Fair enough. We pretty much expected that the PS4 Pro wasn't powerful enough to maintain 60 FPS. We expected that, and that's essentially what we got. What is kind of distracting and kind of jarring, at least at first, for a good while, well, I say a good while, but for a decent while, it pops up now and again. Sure, obviously the frame rate varies pretty wildly in this game, mainly because of what your PS4 is actually rendering and what you can see in the distance. So if you're going into an area that's pretty graphically intensive, or you've got a lot of stuff that you can physically see in front of you, the frame rate is going to drop. And then, you stare, this is a bad example, but like you stare at a wall or you stare at the ground or whatever, your frame rate is going to skyrocket. And the big thing is, when you're turning and you see the camera, it'll start to slow and judder and stutter as it goes along, and it can be a bit cumbersome in combat as well sometimes, when your four boys are all beating down on stuff and all these enemies are, you've got like half a dozen enemies if not more, and they're all working different attacks and coming from different angles, jumping in and out of screen, and you can noticeably see the frame rate as well as all the effects and all. And it can be a bit disheartening and a bit hindering in some ways. It's not as distracting as I expected it to be honest, right? I was going into this expecting probably like 45 to 50 FPS most of the time. And sure, in the quiet scenes it'll hit 60, and the really heavy stuff maybe it'll drop to 40. Apparently, even like I know I said I've avoided most of this stuff online, apparently the majority of the game is spent in around the 40 FPS mark or a little bit above it, with the exception of 1 or 2 very, very graphic heavy scenes which can drop to high 30s. Anyway, this brings me to the next point. The main point of I'm getting for all this, because don't forget, right, I bought the Ultimate Collector's Edition for Final Fantasy 15. That's like, what was it, 260, 280 euro? I can't remember. I bought it when it came out. Well, I pre-ordered it way back because, that edition was hard to get. I got the second print version of it, but because the game was delayed, it arrived on launch day. Anyway, that's beside the point. The fact is, I've had this game sitting here for 3 months, from November to December to January to February, okay? All because I wanted to play with the pre-launch announced 60 FPS PS4 Pro patch. Hell, I bought the PS4 Pro just for, specifically to start anyway, with Final Fantasy 15. And I've already listed my expectations at the time. I wasn't expecting a solid 60 FPS. I was expecting in the 40s to 50s. But where it actually comes from is what we got in this patch. And it makes me want to point at the PS4 Pro itself. So, is the PS4 Pro good enough? Now, personally, I'm going to say, and this is going to annoy a lot of people, I'm going to say no. The PS4 Pro is what the PS4 should have been in 2013 when it launched. Because when you think about it, at the end of the day, what the hardware that's in the PS4 Pro is exactly the same as the hardware that's in the regular PS4. It just has the clock speeds turned up, which is essentially, it's how will I explain this very well? With the exception of extra cooling and things like that, it's exactly the same hardware. They're just turned up faster. Obviously, they're going to require a little bit of extra cooling, which apparently the PS4 Pro has. If you look at all the teardowns and whatnot in the I won't call them unboxings, but in the opening videos or the teardown videos, I already said it. What am I doing? Anyway, the main thing is that this should have been what the PS4 was when it launched. It's so far, a lot of the games with their PS4 Pro dedicated patches have been very underwhelming for a lot of people. Between games that are using the extra power irresponsibly, you're looking at, say, the likes of, I remember I talked about Watch Dogs 2, where they just cranked up the resolution to the point where the game super sampled from like 1800p, but ran worse because it was more intensive. So you get the idea. Like, this should have been the same thing way back then. And I think the gulf in power from the 7th generation of consoles to the 8th generation, a lot of people are saying that the jump from the 7th to 8th generation consoles was arguably the least, or well, the most lackluster jump in generational power gaps ever. I'm inclined to agree for the most part. I'm pretty much inclined to agree. So, no, it's not so much console-wise, it's available hardware at the time wise, because don't forget, we already had games looking better on PC back in 2013 when the consoles launched. So I feel that that's why, and that's part of the whole thing, that the 7th generation went on way too long. But anyway, this brings me back to, well, say Final Fantasy and just the PS4 Pro in general. So I believe that the PS4 Pro, now I haven't got my hands on the beta firmware. I'm still waiting on firmware patch 4.5 so I can actually get access to boost mode and try that, which is the main thing that the PS4 Pro should have launched with on day one and should have been a big feature for it. Real quick, if you're not familiar what boost mode is, it's a kind of prototype feature in the PS4's firmware version 4.0, which is currently being privately tested by beta testers and people who have opted in for the PS4 Pro, and it essentially unlocks a little bit of that extra power of the CPU and GPU, which will make games that do not have PS4 Pro patches run a little bit better. So the likes of, if you have games with very inconsistent frame rates, they will be consistently higher. If you have games that, let's say they run mostly at 30 FPS but experience frame dips, they should experience them less often or maybe not at all. So that's something that should have been put in. Anyway, that's beside the point. So the PS4 Pro, when you look at all the games, or well, you look at, I want to say all the games that support it, but when you look at the lack of games that support it, that's the better way of explaining it. I personally would not recommend anyone. Now this isn't the point of the video, but as someone who has done this, upgraded from a PS4 to a PS4 Pro, specifically for one game at the time, but more so as a little bit of an investment for games down the line, because frankly, a lot of the time I'm unhappy with the performance of the PS4 games I'm running. Now, having said that, most of them are generally Sony exclusives, most of them, not all of them, and first-party games are usually pretty well optimized for the most part. But anyway, that's a whole other argument and conversation. So, where does that leave? I'm going to kind of open this up to something I didn't really plan on talking about, because I know most people who are clicking into this video to watch and listen are probably more interested in the PlayStation side of it, but I'm going to touch on the Xbox side of it as well. We all know about Microsoft's Project Scorpio that's coming later this year at the end of 2017 at some point. Hopefully we'll see it in May if they do a pre-E3 announcement or a pre-E3 show or whatever. If not, we'll most likely see it at E3 itself. So the rumors are, as far as the Xbox Scorpio goes, it's going to be a considerable jump. It's going to be a considerably more powerful hardware. The PS4 Pro is very lackluster, and the improvements and over the standard version are very low quality, if you will, very lo-fi, very low tech, very whatever you want to call it. The differences are minimal for the most part, and it is what it is. And then you have the likes of the Xbox One Scorpio. Now, the big caveat on both of these consoles, in the Xbox family and the PlayStation family, is that they both have to support the PS4, base PS4 games. There's no games that can only run on Scorpio. There's no games that can only run on PS4 Pro. And because of that, they're not considered new generation hardware. They're like, the current term that's being thrown around is a mid-generation refresh. I'm not a fan of it, but I do use the term as well. It's the more used one, so people generally know what I'm referring to. But the big thing is that while the PS4 Pro only had its clock speeds turned up, the Xbox One Scorpio is essentially using more and or newer hardware. I say that for the simple reason is the Xbox One, as it is, has 8 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM in it. Allegedly, now don't forget this is all allegedly, the Xbox One Scorpio is going to use 12 gigabyte of either GDDR5 or GDDR5X, or is it GDDRX5? I can't remember. The same kind of thing that you see in, say, NVIDIA's Pascal series, like my GTX 1080, for example, uses 8 gigabyte of GDDRX5. I can't remember if it's 5X or X5, but whatever. It's the same stuff. So that's an important thing to note, that it actually is not just using more of the same hardware. It's because it is using more of possibly the same hardware with the 12 gig rumored. And the big thing to note is that it's not just upping the clock speeds, because using newer hardware or more of the existing hardware is significantly more of an improvement and more important than just turning up the clock speeds of your existing hardware. So it's curious to see. The Scorpio will kind of hinge on the fact that it does need to run Xbox One games. So because of that, they can't go completely balls to the wall and just give it a, let's for argument's sake call it a 9th generation console. It is still an 8th generation console, but it's more of an improvement, and it's definitely more wordy. Okay, let me rephrase that actually. As it stands right now, with all the rumors and the alleged specs and what we can possibly reasonably assume that the Scorpio will do, it does feel like it could potentially be worth the money and the upgrade and all. I'm personally getting a Scorpio at the end of the year because I'm expecting big things from Microsoft and what they can do with the Scorpio. I'm not expecting perfection, but I'm expecting, if I'm going to stick with, let's say, the next 5 years of playing PS4 and Xbox One games, I want to play them with the best way I can. I don't want to be playing Final Fantasy 15 with a mid-20s FPS. I don't want to be playing, I don't know, let's call it Halo 6 with Halo 5 levels of performance. I want it done with the hardware and the power in mind to keep a rock-solid 60 FPS or whatever. Gears of War, let's get Gears of War 5 with a solid 60 FPS, because the Unreal Engine 4 and its use in Gears of War 4 was just fantastic. So, unfortunately, I'm very disappointed by, I'm gonna pull this video back and just go to its original kind of focus. I'm very disappointed by what we got for the Final Fantasy 15 60 FPS patch. It's not, as I said earlier, it's not completely game breaking and as immersion breaking as I expected. To be honest, for the most part, with the exception of the very heavy frame drops that drop from like 55 to what I can guess is about 40 or high 30s, unless they just go straight like from A to B in the space of a second or two, it's usually not as bad anymore, and I think I can deal with that. So what about you? What's your experience with your PS4 Pro. What's your experience with the Final Fantasy 15 patch? Are you happy with it? Are you unhappy with it? Are you unhappy with the console? Are you unhappy with the actual patch? Are you expecting boost mode to do a bit better? Are you in the beta test program where you've actually got to try boost mode, and what have your experience has been with that? Let me know all that kind of stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter, details in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the rest of the videos in my channel.